Hi, I'm going to talk today about the British colonies from about 1607 to 1754. So that's going from Jamestown, the first British settlement, to the French and Indian War. We're not going to talk about the French and Indian War today, but that's going to be our stopping point. That's a big time in American history when that takes place. So we're going to start there. This is when England establishes her colonies in North America. Now, when they did this, each colony would have, it was one type of charter. England established three different types of charters. You had corporate charters, you had royal charters, and you had proprietary charters. Corporate colonies such as Jamestown had what were called joint stock companies. That means people pitched in together to reduce the risk of what they were doing. We also have royal colonies, which were under direct control of the king or whoever they appointed. And then we have proprietary colonies. These were colonies like Maryland and Pennsylvania. They were under the authority of individuals granted charters by the king. So the king gave somebody a charter, and then they ran the show. So it was a proprietary colony. England had a history of representative government, and that's one of the other main ideas that we see here. So the British colonies would have, since England had a history of representative government through things like the English Bill of Rights, when the colonists came over, they continued those traditions. This is different from what the Spanish or the French did. And so right off the bat, the North American colonies were used to and accustomed to establishing some sort of self-rule. And so we take a look at it. Why does England start to colonize? They were in a position to colonize after they defeated the Spanish Armada. When the Spanish Armada was defeated, England became really pretty much the naval power in Europe. And so they were in position to take advantage of that economically. They're not the first to go and explore. The Portuguese and the Spanish were ahead of the game. So were the Dutch and the French, and the British come along a little bit later. So they became a naval power. Population growth in England also would encourage people to migrate over to the Americas. England had a bad economy during this time. All the wars put a lot of chinks into the British economy, and people were looking for a fresh start. And so that would be another reason why people would start to colonize in the Americas. And because of that, also because of England's poor economy during this time, there was a lot of landless poor that saw the opportunity of land in the new colonies. So the first colony, Jamestown in Virginia, would be chartered by King James, and it was a joint stock company. Now, the area of Jamestown, Virginia was pretty swampy. The early colonists there really struggled. Dysentery and malaria were big-time problems, and so disease took a lot of lives. Another problem for the early colonists at Jamestown is that many of them were gold seekers and were not used to hard physical labor. They were going there to try to seek riches. They heard the stories of the Spanish conquistadors of this place of plenty, this place that had gold, a tremendous amount of gold, and so they thought that they were going to get that opportunity. So when they had to come over, they didn't know how to farm. They didn't know how to clear land so that they could farm. They were just going to go try to make gold or try to find gold. And so the very early aspects of Jamestown was a big-time struggle. What helped them survive was trade with the local natives. Powhatan, which famous Chief Powhatan and his daughter Pocahontas are famous and glorified in American history. They were a source of trade that helped the colonies succeed. However, there were conflicts that would make that very difficult. The story of John Smith was essential for Jamestown surviving early on. Now, there's a lot of myths about John Smith, but from this standpoint, his efforts helped the earliest of the Jamestown settlement succeed. Later on, John Rolfe, who would end up marrying Pocahontas, he would introduce this region to a tobacco that would prove very fruitful and would provide wealth for them and make Jamestown valuable economically. And that would ultimately lead to the success of Jamestown. Now, even with tobacco, though, the colony went bankrupt. They struggled. And so King James revoked the charter of the Joint Stock Company, and he made it a royal colony in 1624. And this would help, and from that point on, we see the establishment of Virginia. And so, why does Jamestown start? It was for economic reasons. All right, that was the beginning of it. The early settlers of Jamestown, Virginia, were for economic reasons. But Jamestown wasn't the only one. Now, that was the first one, that's 1607. The economics were not the only reason. Religion also played a part. We start off with Plymouth, the Pilgrims. 1620. This starts off, these people went there for religious reasons. The Protestants opposed the Church of England, the Anglican Church. They were upset with some of the rules of what was going on, and so these dissenters wanted to have the Anglican Church to have a bigger break from the Romans, and that didn't happen, and so they opposed. They were called separatists because they wanted to completely separate from the Roman ideologies, and that wasn't happening. And so at first the separatists went to Holland, but they were upset with Dutch society as well. There was economic hardship, which made life difficult on the Pilgrims, and the cultural differences of a much more tolerant society didn't really fit in with what they wanted. And so that led to the Pilgrims going to the New World. Now, originally they were trying to get to Jamestown. They were trying to get to Virginia, but they got blown off course. This is the Mayflower here, and led by people like William Bradford. They went off course and they landed in what we now know as Massachusetts. The story of the first Thanksgiving holds true. They encountered rough winters, they struggled mightily, and so the relationship there with the natives in the first Thanksgiving was important for their survival. They celebrated a good harvest and all that. The early economics of Plymouth Colony, fish, furs, and timber would end up becoming their economic mainstays and would allow them to continue and eventually grow stronger. Plymouth was not the only one that was established in Massachusetts, and it was not the only one for religious reasons either. Massachusetts Bay Colony would get established as well. You also had people who were dissenting from the Church of England, but they didn't want to have the complete break like the Pilgrims did. These were non-separatists, and we call them Puritans. The Puritans were non-separatists. They were the dissension that both the Pilgrims and the Puritans showed were not tolerated in England during the times of King Charles I, who succeeded King James. So Massachusetts Bay, they get out of England, they go to Massachusetts. They're given a royal charter by Charles I, and their focus was to seek religious freedom. They were led by a guy named John Winthrop. In 1630, Massachusetts Bay was established. So we start off with Jamestown, 1607, Plymouth, 1620, when the Mayflower lands, and 1630 by Winthrop. More and more settlers would start to go to Massachusetts. About 15,000 settlers would go after Civil War in England. Would leave a lot of people wanting to flee. So not only do we have economic reasons with Virginia, we have religious reasons with both Plymouth and Massachusetts, but we also have political oppression reasons. People were trying to flee the war conditions that were going on. So those were some of the push and pull factors that would bring people to these colonies, and that 15,000 after the war was called the Great